In the bitter cold of a December morning, 1943, the harsh winds of Nazi-occupied France cut through the air, the smell of smoke mingling with the faint scent of pine. The thick fog that blanketed the French countryside served as a cover, but it also concealed the horrors of war that lay beneath. Just outside of Lyon, in the shadows of the Alps, a young woman named Simone Lemoine, barely 20, took her first steps into what would become one of the most legendary missions of the Second World War. Her mission was impossible by any measure. She was tasked with infiltrating a high-security German communications base, one that had successfully repelled every Allied attempt to breach it. A place where the enemy had anticipated every strategy, every technique, every approach. Yet Simone was different. Unassuming in appearance, with raven black hair pulled tightly into a bun and an unremarkable stature, she was the embodiment of the ordinary woman who would be overlooked in a crowd. But as the German forces would soon find out, there was nothing ordinary about Simone. With the weight of the world on her shoulders, Simone boarded the train at dawn, her heart beating in time with the rhythmic clattering of the wheels against the tracks. She was alone, but not truly. Her mind was sharpened, her resolve steeled with the heavy knowledge that failure was not an option. As the sun barely touched the horizon, she slipped out of the station and into the bustling streets of Lyon, blending into the crowd as if she had lived there all her life. The mission she had been given came straight from the heart of the French resistance, a network built on secrecy, ingenuity, and a deep-seated desire for vengeance. Her series of radio transmissions had been intercepted, revealing an ominous plot that could shift the war in favor of the Germans if left unchecked. The transmissions led directly to the high-security facility hidden in the hills, a place where vital communications and intelligence were being relayed directly to Berlin. It was here that Simone was to plant a listening device, a seemingly simple task, but the consequences of failure would be catastrophic. The Germans knew every corner of their base, every crack in the walls. There was no room for error. As she navigated through the labyrinth of narrow streets, her eyes scanned every shadow, every alley, for signs of danger. Simone knew that it was not just the German soldiers who posed a threat. The very nature of espionage demanded an ever-present paranoia. Every passerby could be an informant, every glance a betrayal. Yet it was this very vigilance, the ability to disappear into the shadows without a trace, that made her a master of her craft. The resistance had trained her for months, but no amount of preparation could ever truly prepare her for the reality of her mission. It was not just about stealth, it was about survival. A single mistake, a single misstep, and the consequences would be irreversible. She was well aware of this, but it was the price one had to pay when the stakes were this high. Simone reached the outskirts of the German facility as night began to fall, the shadows growing deeper, more oppressive. The full moon cast an eerie glow on the surrounding hills, giving the landscape an almost dreamlike quality, as though the night itself were watching her. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and then crept forward, her movements calculated and deliberate. The facility loomed ahead, a fortress of steel and concrete. But it was not the fortress that worried her. It was the men who guarded it. Inside, the soldiers were confident, even arrogant. They believed their fortress was impenetrable, that the Allies would never succeed in breaching it. But they had underestimated the power of deception. As Simone edged closer to the facility, she noticed the guards in their routine patrols, their rigid formations, the precise movements they had been drilled to perform. Their discipline was their greatest strength and their greatest weakness. They believed in the certainty of their own security, unaware that someone had slipped past their defenses, someone who would turn their perfect operation into chaos. The facility was heavily guarded, but Simone had learned to read the subtle signs of human error, the way the guards shifted their weight slightly too often, the little distractions that could be exploited. She slipped through the outer perimeter with ease, moving like a shadow, blending into the terrain. It was then that she encountered her first challenge, a single guard stationed at a small security post near the entrance. He was alone, staring into the distance, his rifle resting lazily at his side. Simone's heart raced, but she didn't falter. She had trained for this moment, for the unspoken decision that must be made in the blink of an eye. The decision to kill or to spare. The guard would never know how close he came to death. With a swift, calculated movement, she knocked him unconscious, her hands moving with practiced precision. As she entered the compound, her senses heightened, Simone moved deeper into the heart of the base. The sounds of the night, distant footsteps, the occasional murmur of German soldiers, were drowned out by the pounding of her own heartbeat. The tension in the air was palpable, as if the entire facility was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. She navigated the corridors, relying on the blueprints she had memorized during her training, all the while knowing that the longer she remained inside, the closer she came to being discovered. The door to the communications room stood before her, a heavy metal barrier that separated her from the enemy's most guarded secrets. As she crouched low, listening for the sounds of footsteps, Simone's mind raced. She had only moments before the next patrol would pass, and in those moments, she would need to plant the device that could change the course of the war. It was not just a matter of espionage. It was a matter of survival. The fate of her comrades, of countless innocent lives, rested on her ability to complete the mission. The sounds of approaching footsteps echoed down the hallway, and with a final fleeting glance at the room she was about to infiltrate, Simone stepped forward. The door creaked open, and inside a single soldier stood by a desk, his back to her. His focus was on the glowing radio transmitter in front of him, unaware of the imminent threat that now stood in his midst. But as she took a step forward, a sound, distant but unmistakable, echoed from behind her. A muffled voice. Another soldier. Her pulse spiked. It was now or never. Simone's fingers, steady and sure, began to work. The clock was ticking, and the mission was about to unfold in ways no one could predict. Her legend was about to be born. The soldier in the communications room hadn't noticed her yet. His back was still turned, oblivious to the figure silently creeping toward him. Every fiber of Simone's being was alive, pulsing with the sharp edge of the moment, the tiny radio device in her hand. A masterpiece of ingenuity developed by the resistance, could shift the tides of war. It was compact, easy to conceal, but its potential was limitless. She'd only need to plant it near the transmitter, remain unseen, and escape. Something far easier said than done. As she moved forward, every step measured and silent, Simone knew she had mere seconds before the soldier turned around. Her mind was a whirlwind of calculations, her body locked in the precise rhythm of her training. The soldier's movements were slow, almost too casual, a false sense of security that would end up being his undoing. He adjusted the receiver, oblivious to the woman crouching mere feet from him. Simone's breath was controlled, shallow. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small pouch containing a handful of explosive charges. She didn't plan to use them, not yet anyway, but their presence was a reminder of just how dangerous the mission was. If things went south, those explosives would ensure the entire facility would be destroyed before the enemy could figure out what had happened. But the goal was clear: get in, get out, and leave no trace. Her fingers were steady as she moved the radio device into place, tucking it behind a stack of papers on the desk, just below the soldier's line of sight. The moment she finished, she froze, listening intently for any sound of the approaching patrol. It was time to go. Just as she prepared to step back, the soldier's hand twitched, a subtle movement that could easily be missed. But not by Simone. Her instincts kicked in. In an instant, her hand shot out, her palm pressing against the back of the soldier's neck. He barely had time to react before he crumpled under her grip, unconscious and silent. She stood still for a moment, allowing herself a brief, controlled breath. Every part of her body screamed for release, for movement, but she held her ground. If there were any other soldiers nearby, they would hear the thud of his body against the floor, or worse, the sound of his soft groan when he regained consciousness. The tension in the air was thick enough to suffocate, but Simone didn't allow herself to react. She had come too far to fail now. Moving swiftly, she crept back to the door, her senses heightened to every shift in the atmosphere. The hallways were silent, eerily so. It was almost as if the entire base were holding its breath, waiting for something monumental to happen. But Simone knew the truth. They hadn't yet realized that something monumental already had. The exit lay just ahead, a path she had memorized during her previous nights of reconnaissance. The walls around her seemed to close in as she neared the door, the sound of her own breath becoming deafening in the stillness. She reached for the handle, her heart pounding in her chest. The air was thick with the weight of the mission's success. One move wrong, one misstep, and she would be caught. The door creaked open just slightly as she peered into the hallway. No soldiers in sight, not yet. She stepped out of the room, her eyes darting down the corridor. In the distance, a faint shadow flickered. A patrol. Her heart skipped a beat, but her mind was clear. The resistance had prepared her for this. They had shown her how to blend, how to become the very essence of the night. Simone melted into the shadows, her body pressing against the cool stone walls as the patrol passed by. They moved with a practiced rhythm, each man knowing his place, his step, his role, but not a single one of them knew she was there, just inches away. They were unaware that the fate of their entire operation rested in the hands of one determined woman. The moment they passed, Simone exhaled slowly, her body releasing the tension she had held for what seemed like an eternity. Her pace quickened, but still, she remained the ghost she had trained to be. As she moved through the final stretch of the compound, she couldn't help but feel the enormity of what she had done. She had planted the device, yes, but what had seemed impossible, the idea that one person, one individual, could slip through the cracks of an impenetrable fortress, had been achieved. But that wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The device would now transmit key information to the resistance, sending back vital intel that could cripple the German war effort. But to the enemy it would remain a mystery. How had they been infiltrated? Who was the shadow that had slipped through their defenses, leaving only confusion in her wake? Simone's steps echoed in the stillness of the night, growing fainter as she neared the edge of the compound. She had made it. Her heart was still racing, but now there was a sense of calm. She had done the impossible. She reached the outer wall of the facility, where a small gap had been left in the barbed wire, an escape route she'd memorized on her first night in the area. As she slipped through the gap, her mind raced with the knowledge of what had just occurred. This would be a mission for the history books, a mission that would eventually become legend. But Simone was no longer a part of the story she would tell. She was the story, an enigma that no one could ever truly find. Behind her, the German facility sat silent, unaware of the catastrophe it had narrowly avoided. In the coming days, their confusion would grow as they scrambled to find the source of the breach. But Simone's name would never be known. She would disappear into the shadows, her legend growing with each passing year. The impossible had been done, and no one would ever know how it had happened. The news of the sabotage spread quickly, yet no one knew where it had originated. The Germans were in a state of panic, their once unshakable confidence beginning to crack. Their most secure communications channel had been compromised, and no one could explain how. Within hours, confusion set in across the German ranks. The once meticulous plans began to unravel, and the Allies moved in with newfound confidence, aware of the advantage they had just gained. The key to their success lay in a single, seemingly insignificant act. One woman slipping through the cracks of their defense and vanishing without a trace. For the French resistance, Simone's mission was a resounding success, a turning point that would change the course of the war in ways they couldn't fully comprehend yet. The device she had planted in the heart of the German operations sent back encrypted messages to the Allied forces, revealing the enemy's plans, their next moves, and most crucially, their weaknesses. What had been an impenetrable fortress was now a house of cards waiting to collapse. Simone's name, however, would never be spoken in public. The very essence of her success lay in her ability to disappear. She was a ghost, a phantom who had become the symbol of what was possible when everything seemed impossible. The Germans searched frantically for the source of their breach, interrogating prisoners, tearing through records, but they found nothing. Their search would last for months, but Simone remained elusive, her whereabouts known only to a select few in the resistance. But as the war raged on, Simone's mission would serve as a reminder to the Allies that, in the world of espionage, there was more to victory than firepower and technology. There was the element of surprise, the human ingenuity that could slip unnoticed through the cracks of enemy defenses. It was not enough to have the best tanks, the fastest planes, or the most powerful weapons. In the end, it was the courage, the stealth, and the relentless will to succeed that made all the difference. As the war moved into 1944, the Allies began to press their advantage, pushing the Germans back on every front. The tides of war were shifting, and Simone's actions had played a pivotal role in that shift. The intelligence she had provided allowed the Allies to outmaneuver the Germans at critical points, forcing them into retreat. Yet for all her impact, Simone never sought recognition. She had always known that her success was not about personal glory, but about the greater cause. The war was bigger than any one person, and for her that was enough. But the psychological impact of her mission was far-reaching. For the Germans, her success was a crushing blow to their confidence. They had believed their security measures to be invulnerable, and her ability to breach them shattered their sense of invincibility. Their morale began to erode, replaced by a creeping fear that their every move could be undermined by the most unlikely of enemies, a single woman. Trained to slip through their defenses unnoticed, the mental toll of her mission was also felt within the French resistance. Simone's feat was not just a tactical victory. It was a symbol of what they were capable of achieving. It gave them hope. It fueled their determination to keep fighting even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Simone became a myth within the resistance, a story passed down through hushed whispers and knowing glances. Her name, though never spoken aloud, would inspire countless others to take up arms, to risk everything for the chance to bring down the German war machine. In the years that followed, the war's impact rippled across the world. The psychological and strategic ramifications of Simone's mission stretched far beyond the borders of France. The Allies began to view espionage in a new light, no longer just a supplementary tool, but a weapon in its own right. Her success proved that information, intelligence, and the ability to outthink the enemy were just as important as firepower. In the post-war years, espionage would become a cornerstone of modern warfare, its lessons drawn directly from the legacy of those like Simone Lemoine. Simone's legacy would extend even further, into the Cold War and beyond, as nations realized the value of intelligence and covert operations. The ability to remain unseen, to strike with precision and stealth, would become a defining feature of military doctrine in the decades to come. And though the details of her mission would remain shrouded in secrecy, its impact would be felt in every conflict that followed. Yet Simone herself was never found. Despite the exhaustive searches, the interrogations, and the endless pursuit, she faded from the public eye, her name becoming just another whispered legend of the war. To the world, she was the ultimate enigma, an individual whose courage and skill had shifted the balance of the war, yet whose very identity remained a mystery. As the war drew to a close, Simone's role in the Allied victory would be acknowledged only in the most clandestine of circles. The resistance, understanding the value of her work, would quietly mark her actions as one of the greatest successes of their campaign. But Simone, ever humble and ever elusive, would never seek the accolades or recognition that were rightfully hers. To her, the mission was never about fame. It was about fulfilling a duty that no one else could. The story of Simone Lemoine would go down in history as one of the most daring and successful acts of espionage the world had ever seen. Yet no one would ever truly know the woman who had made it all possible. She would remain a legend, a symbol of the power of the human spirit to defy the odds, to turn the impossible into reality, and to remain hidden in the shadows, leaving behind only the faintest trace of her mark on the world. And perhaps that was the greatest victory of all. In the end, she proved that sometimes the greatest weapon in war is not a gun, a plane, or a tank. It is the ability to disappear when the world is watching.